Sanders, I want you to be reintroduced to this body of activists as we are honored with your presence at our convention. Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. As a proud graduate of PS 197, I'm delighted to be here. Let me thank President Randy Weingarten and every one of the members of the AFT. You know and I know this is not an easy time to be an educator. It is not an easy time to be a trade unionist. But on behalf of millions of children, their parents, and their community, I thank you for doing some of the most important work in the United States of America. And as Randy mentioned, let me give a shout out to the brothers and sisters, the nurses, AFT nurses in Burlington, Vermont. They have staged a 2-day strike for decent wages, decent benefits, decent patient-staff ratios, and they have the support of our entire community in Burlington. Now, I know that over the last few days, you have heard remarks from some of the most knowledgeable people in our country, so it is not necessary for me to repeat what they have said. So what I want to do in the time that I have is bluntly sum up where I believe we are today as a nation, where I believe we have got to go in the future, and how we can best reach our goals. Now, what I'm going to tell you contains some bad news, which you already know, and it contains some good news. But what I want to convey to you from the bottom of my heart is that if we stand up and fight back, if we educate and organize, if we show the courage and unity that this moment in history requires, I have no doubt but that we are going to win and bring a beautiful future to our country. Now, let me go over some of the bad news. First news you already know, and that is economically. Despite the relatively low unemployment of today, real wages for American workers could continue to decline. Millions of Americans are today working 2 or 3 jobs, including teachers all across this country. And we have 40 million people living in poverty. Meanwhile, the wealthiest people in America have never had it better. We have more income and wealth inequality than any other major country on earth. And today, that inequality is worse than any time since the 1920s. In America today, the top 0.1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. Today, 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of the American society. Today, 52% of all new income is going to the top 1%. Today, the CEO of Amazon wealthiest person in the world, earns $275 million every single day. But he pays many of his workers wages that are so low that many of them are forced to go on Medicaid and food stamps. And when we talk about education, please remember that today, the top 25 hedge fund managers on Wall Street make more money than all of the kindergarten teachers in this country combined. Giving tax breaks to billionaires, spending unlimited sums on the military, and telling us we do not have enough money for education is not the priorities that the people of this country want to see. Now that's what's going on economically. Politically, we have a president who in an unprecedented way is motivated by greed and power. He is also a pathological liar. And I know every day you tell your students, you say to your kids, tell the truth. You say to your kids, don't be bullies. And what kind of terrible example is he setting to the children of this country? But he is also a president who has betrayed the people who voted for him. During his campaign, Trump told the American people that he was going to protect the working families of this country. He lied. He promised that he would bring health care to everybody, but he ended up throwing 32 million Americans, trying to throw 32 million Americans off of the health care that they have. His efforts to destroy the Affordable Care Act are driving insurance rates up every single day. And if you can believe it, his administration supports ending the provision which protects people who have pre-existing conditions. During the campaign, you'll all recall, Trump said, I'm a different type of Republican. I'm not going to cut Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security. But he then brought up a budget calling for $1 trillion cut in Medicaid, $500 billion in Medicare, and billions in the Social Security disability insurance program. During his campaign, he promised that his tax bill would not benefit the wealthy. He lied again. 83% of the benefits of that tax bill at the end of 10 years go to the top 1%. He said he was going to take on Wall Street, but he ended up deregulating Wall Street and bringing more Wall Street executives and billionaires into his administration than any president in history. But not only has his economic policies benefit the very rich, the truth is that his social policies are even worse. In a way unique to any president in modern history, he is, in the most un-American way possible, attempting to divide the people of our country up based on the color of our skin, our country of birth, our gender, our sexual orientation, or our religion. Several weeks ago, some of you may recall that Donald Trump said it was an indication of strength to tear little babies on the southern border from the arms of their mother. Mr. Trump, that is not an indication of strength. That is an indication of moral weakness and extreme cruelty. And that is not what this country is about or ever will be about. Thank you. And when Trump tries to bring back discrimination in this country, we tell him that this country has suffered for too many years from racism and sexism and homophobia and xenophobia. We are not going back. We are going forward. And for all of these reasons and more, the American people are going to make Donald Trump a one-term president. Today we have a Congress significantly funded by wealthy Republican donors that in many ways has ceased to be an independent branch of government. Instead, it has become a willful and obedient puppy dog for the president, largely ignoring his attacks on democracy, his attacks on the media, his attacks on the judiciary, his attacks on federal law enforcement agencies, and his dangerous movement toward authoritarianism. For all of those reasons and more, we intend in the 2018 midterm elections to end one-party Republican government in Washington and take back the House and the Senate. We have a Supreme Court. You all remember the Supreme Court? We have a Supreme Court that in recent years has faithfully and consistently done the bidding of the wealthy and the powerful. They have given us the disastrous Citizens United decision, which allows billionaires to buy elections and undermines American democracy. They have given us a decision on the Affordable Care Act, which allows governors all over this country to deny Medicaid coverage to millions of Americans who desperately need that coverage. They have made decisions which undermine the Voting Rights Act, allowing governors to make it easier to suppress the vote for people of color, for poor people, and for young people. And they have recently given us the disastrous Janus decision. Well, you know, sometimes decisions and actions have unintended consequences. And I have the feeling that those who thought that the Janus decision would hurt the trade union movement in this country may be in for a big surprise. And it may end up being one of those decisions that helps us rebuild the trade union movement in America. Now, those are some of the bad Supreme Court decisions coming up. May well be Roe versus Wade and other important decisions. And for all of those reasons and more, we must do everything that we can to defeat the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh as the next Supreme Court Justice. Now, that's some of the bad news that's out there. But here is some very, very good news. And in fact, the good news trumps the bad news. And that is that all over this country, people are standing up and fighting back, not just against Donald Trump, but more importantly, for a progressive agenda that creates a government that works for all of us, not just the 1%. Pay attention, because the media often does not, but there is a political revolution sweeping across this country. As Randy mentioned when she introduced me, we are now seeing ideas that just a few years ago were considered fringe ideas, radical ideas, but today, because workers all across this country are standing up and fighting back, those ideas are now mainstream ideas adopted by the vast majority of the American people. And we are seeing great candidates running for office on those ideas and winning elections. We have seen just recently a young woman from the Bronx, New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was a waitress a year ago, will now be a United States Congresswoman and a progressive Congresswoman. We have, within the last month, seen the former president of the NAACP, a good friend of mine, strong progressive, Ben Jealous, win the Democratic primary in Maryland. And Ben is going to become the next governor of the state of Maryland. We have seen Larry Krasner, a district attorney here in Philadelphia. And Larry's idea of criminal justice is not locking up more people, but reducing the prison population. We have seen progressives in Chicago with Chuy Garcia helping to take on the Democratic machine there and bring young people into the political process. And right here, no better example, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, two young women were elected to the legislature, Summer Lee and Sarah Innamorato. They took on 20-year incumbents in the Democratic primary, brought hundreds of people into their campaign, and won landslide victories on progressive agenda. And as part of that political revolution, teachers all across this country are standing up and leading the fight for education reform. Who would have thought that in West Virginia, in Kentucky, in Oklahoma, teachers are demanding decent education for their kids and are taking on right-wing political establishments? Thank you, teachers. Young people in Parkland, Florida, who went through one of the most horrific experiences that any human being can go through. They didn't simply retreat and become depressed and mourn. They stood up and fought back successfully for common sense gun safety legislation all across this country. We're seeing workers successfully stand up and fight for a minimum wage, which is a living wage, $15 an hour. A few years ago, the idea that we should make public colleges and universities tuition-free seemed to be a radical idea. The idea that we should lower the horrific level of student debt in this country, a radical idea. But today, that is exactly what is happening in communities all across this country. Every young American, regardless of his or her income, should be able to get a higher education. And if Trump can give the billionaires $1 trillion tax break, yeah, we could substantially lower student debt in this country. A few years ago, some of us said that maybe the United States of America should join every other major country on earth and guarantee health care as a right through Medicare for all. And editorial page after editorial page said, Bernie, you're crazy. That's too radical. The American people won't accept it. A poll came out yesterday, consistent with many other polls. 63% of the American people support a Medicare for all single-payer program. Brothers and sisters, our job now, more than any time in modern American history, is to think big and not small. It is to understand that when we reach out with a progressive agenda that speaks to the needs of working families, we can get people to run for office, we can increase voter turnout, and we can take on the oligarchy that now controls this country. Our job now is to change national priorities, to make sure that every American knows that there is nothing more important than a quality public education for every child in this country. So, brothers and sisters, in the midst of these difficult times, I am not pessimistic. I believe that this is a moment where the American people are saying loud and clear, not just to Trump, not just to Congress, but they are saying no to a set of priorities which benefit the wealthy and the powerful and ignore the needs of working families. Our job now, as never before, is to stand up, is to fight back, and to create the nation we know we can become. Thank you all very much.